The rain tapped lightly against the windows, a soft, rhythmic sound that almost drowned out the silence in the house. Sarah stood by the door, her hand resting on the knob, waiting. The house felt empty, like it had been for days now, only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards breaking the stillness. She had gotten used to the quiet, to the absence of footsteps, the absence of her. But there was always this lingering sense, this feeling, that something was about to shift. The knock came, soft but steady, and Sarah felt her heart lurch before she even opened the door. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to see her again. When she opened it, Emily stood there, a suitcase in her hand, her eyes filled with something Sarah couldn't place. They were older now, these eyes, full of questions neither of them were ready to answer. Emily didn't smile, didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, holding the suitcase like it was an anchor, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The moment stretched between them, longer than it should have been. Sarah could feel the weight of the years, the distance, the promises that had been made and broken. The doorframe felt like it was closing in on her, like there was no space left for anything but the two of them. There was history here, too much of it, too much to ever forget. I thought you'd be gone by now, Sarah said, her voice low, almost surprised by the words as they left her mouth. Emily's fingers tightened around the handle of the suitcase, her hands trembling slightly. She looked down for a moment, then met Sarah's eyes, her gaze soft but guarded. "I promised you I'd leave, Sarah," she said quietly, "and I meant it, but something changed." The words hung in the air, but neither of them moved. Emily stepped closer, the suitcase shifting slightly in her hand as she pulled out the house keys, the last shared thing between them. She handed them over, her fingers brushing against Sarah's for just a second, a fleeting touch that held more weight than it should have. "I'm done," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes studying the floor now. "For good. This is it. I'm leaving, but I couldn't leave without giving this back." Sarah's hand trembled as she took the keys, her fingers cold against the metal. She hadn't thought this moment would come. She had expected Emily to disappear for good, to follow through on the promises made, the promises they had both tried to bury. And yet, here she was, standing in front of her like nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. The air between them felt thick, heavier now. It wasn't just the silence, it was the way Emily stood there, not quite looking at her, not quite moving. Like she was waiting for something, for Sarah to say something, to do something. But Sarah didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to fill this space between them that felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. There was a tension in the room, something that neither of them could name but both felt, a quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was the last time they would stand like this, in this house, in this place they had once shared. But the truth was, they had already crossed the line, already crossed the point of no return. And no amount of promises or words could change what had already been lost. "I didn't think you'd come back," Sarah said after a long pause, her voice softer now. The words felt like they were dragging themselves out of her, like they had been buried for too long. "I didn't think you could." Emily's breath caught, her eyes shifting toward Sarah for the first time since she had arrived. "I didn't think I could either," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "But here I am." The weight of it all hit Sarah at once, the years, the heartache, the things they had both tried to forget. The house, once full of laughter and dreams, now felt cold, hollow, as though it too were waiting for something to change, for something to be fixed. But Sarah knew better than to think that anything could be fixed. Not after everything they had been through, not after the things they had said to each other, the things they had hidden from one another. "Do you think we can move on?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on the keys in her hand. She didn't know if she was asking Emily or herself. Maybe it was both. Maybe they both needed to hear it, needed to believe that they could somehow find a way to walk away from all of it. Emily didn't answer right away. She took a slow, careful breath, her gaze drifting past Sarah, as though she were searching for an answer in the empty hallway. "I don't know, Sarah," she said quietly, her voice tinged with something Sarah couldn't quite place. "I don't know if we can, but I know I can't stay here anymore. I can't keep pretending." The words hit Sarah harder than she had expected, like a slap to the chest. Pretending. That was what they had both been doing, wasn't it? Pretending that everything was fine, pretending that the things between them could be fixed, that the past could be erased. But no matter how hard they tried, they both knew it was too late. The damage had been done, the trust broken, and no amount of time or promises could change that. "I can't stay here either," Sarah said, her voice barely audible now. She wasn't talking about the house. She was talking about everything. She was talking about the way things had turned out, about the way she had let herself believe that something could change, that they could change. But they couldn't. Not now, not after everything that had happened. They stood in the doorway, the silence pressing in on them, heavier than ever. The moment between them felt stretched, like a thread pulled tight between them, but neither of them knew what to do with it. There were no words left to say, no promises left to keep. The past had already slipped through their fingers, and all that remained was the weight of it. "Goodbye, Sarah," Emily said quietly, her voice low, almost resigned. She didn't wait for an answer. She didn't look back as she turned and walked down the hallway, her suitcase rolling softly behind her. Sarah didn't move. She stood there, the keys still clutched in her hand, her heart aching with the weight of what had just happened. She knew this was the end. This was the moment they had both been avoiding, the moment they had both feared. And now that it was here, now that everything had been said and done, there was nothing left but the silence. Celine stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, the weight of it all settling in her chest. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had come, she wasn't sure what to do with it. When Emily left, she didn't take the past with her. It stayed behind, in the walls of the house, in the memories of laughter and broken promises. It stayed with Sarah, in the hollow quiet that would never be filled. The rain had stopped. The silence was all that was left. The house was still, its silence pressing in on Sarah like a heavy blanket. The first night in a new place was always like this, she thought. Everything was new, everything was quiet. The kind of quiet that swallowed every sound, leaving only the ticking of a clock in the distance and the faint hum of the refrigerator. She stood in the middle of the living room, her bare feet cool against the polished wooden floor. The house was beautiful, just as she had imagined, but now that she was here, she couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The coldness was the first thing she noticed. It wasn't the kind of cold that came with winter or a draft. It was deeper, more unsettling, like the house had been frozen in time. She could feel it creeping into her bones, the chill that started in her feet and worked its way up her legs. She hadn't expected it to feel this way. She hadn't expected the stillness, the weight of it. Her fingers grazed the empty kitchen counter, the cold surface smooth under her touch. She had always imagined this moment, had dreamed about it, even standing in this very kitchen, preparing meals, making memories. The countertops would have been cluttered with everything she'd needed, a cup of coffee in the morning, a plate of dinner in the evening. But now, the counter was bare, untouched, just like the rest of the house. Her eyes traced the outlines of the rooms, the faint shadows falling across the walls. The living room was quiet, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows that stretched across the hardwood floor. The hallway beyond was dark, the rooms empty, waiting. It was everything she had wanted. A house of her own, a place to build a life. But now that she was here, alone in the stillness, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't hers. It wasn't real. The weight of their past, of everything that had brought them to this moment, hung heavy in the air, too close, too present. She stepped farther into the room, the cold of the floor seeping into her skin. The chill clung to her, a reminder that the walls here had witnessed things she couldn't erase. Her gaze moved across the room again, her heart heavy with something she couldn't name. She had thought the silence would be comforting, a break from the chaos that had once filled her life. But now, it felt suffocating. It felt like something more than just the absence of sound. Her breath was shallow as she moved to the window, her fingers brushing against the cool glass. The view outside was just as empty as the rooms within. The garden, the yard, the sky beyond, all of it stretched out before her, untouched, waiting. But it was the emptiness that stood out the most. The silence outside mirrored the silence inside. Her chest tightened. What was this gnawing feeling, this sense that something was wrong? She couldn't place it. It wasn't just the quiet, the stillness. It was something deeper, something buried under the layers of the past. She closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She had imagined this day so many times, had dreamed of being here, in this house, with the future ahead of her. But now that it was real, now that she had stepped inside, the silence was deafening. It was louder than any noise could be. The coldness seeped deeper into her bones, and with it came the creeping sensation that something was missing. Something was absent, something she hadn't realized she needed. The weight of their past, of everything that had happened before, seemed to settle around her, wrapping itself around her shoulders like a cold cloak. She had wanted a new beginning, a fresh start, but the past had followed her here, clinging to her like a shadow. She took a deep breath, her fingers still pressed against the cool glass, and tried to push the thoughts away. She had come here for a reason. This was her chance. But as she stood there, in the quiet, empty house, she wondered how long it would take before the weight of everything they had left behind would catch up with her. How long before the silence became too loud to ignore? How long before she would have to face it all, the past, the choices, the uncertainty that still gnawed at her heart? Her fingers dropped from the window as she turned back toward the living room. The silence felt heavy now, like a presence in the room, but she couldn't escape it. She had come here for something more, for something better. But as the shadows in the room deepened, she realized that maybe she wasn't just running toward something. Maybe she was running from something too. And no matter how hard she tried to push it away, she couldn't escape the feeling that the house wasn't empty. It wasn't empty at all. It was filled with everything she had been running from, and it was watching her, waiting for her to face it. The silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating, as the night settled deeper around her. The coldness, the emptiness, it was all part of the house now, part of her new beginning. But somewhere deep inside, Sarah knew that no amount of space, no amount of distance, would ever be enough to outrun the past. And that gnawing feeling in her chest, she would carry it with her, whether she wanted to or not. The morning light stretched lazily across the bare walls of the living room, casting long, quiet shadows. It spilled through the open blinds, soft and pale, touching the cold, empty floor. The air in the room was still, like it was waiting for something to fill it, waiting for something to make it real. Celine had tried to fill the space with movement, with the small tasks that made a house feel like a home, arranging the few items she'd brought from the apartment, dusting the corners, folding the blankets, fluffing the pillows. The sofa was too big for the room, its fabric stiff, untouched. A lamp stood alone in the corner, its light dim and hesitant. She didn't know why she kept moving things around, making small adjustments as though it would make a difference, as though it would somehow make the house feel less empty. But no matter what she did, no matter how many times she rearranged the furniture, the room felt hollow. The walls felt cold and uninviting, like they were still waiting for something to happen, waiting for some spark that would fill the emptiness. The house was a blank canvas, but it wasn't a canvas she wanted to paint. Not yet. Not when it all felt so temporary. She sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her, staring at the photograph in her hands. The photo was old, faded at the edges. It was of her and Vincent, both of them children, sitting on the steps of their old house, smiling with the kind of carefree joy that felt so far away now. Their faces were so young, so untainted by the years that had come between them. The kind of faces that didn't know about loss, about guilt, about all the things that had worn them down. She traced the outline of their young faces with her thumb, feeling the weight of the memory. How had they gotten here? How had they come from this, from happiness and simplicity, to this? This house, this strange new place where nothing felt settled, where everything felt wrong. The picture of their younger selves seemed like a distant dream, something that didn't belong to her anymore. The walls of the house felt suffocating now. They were so empty, so raw. They were just walls, and the space between them was vast and cold. There was nothing here to anchor her. No familiar scent, no warmth, not yet. She had come here for a fresh start, she had told herself. A place to build new memories, new hopes, but it wasn't working. The house was just a house. It wasn't a home, not yet. And with each passing day, she wondered if it ever would be. She dropped the photograph onto the floor beside her and closed her eyes, rubbing her temples as if that would stop the thoughts from swirling around in her head. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for anymore. Maybe the house needed time. Maybe she needed time. But every day she spent here, it felt like she was suffocating. Every day, she felt more and more disconnected from everything she had left behind, from the apartment, from the life she had known, from the person she used to be. The walls, bare and unadorned, stared back at her. There was nothing here to remind her of who she had been, nothing to remind her of the life she had tried to leave behind. And it was starting to feel like that was all she had now, memories of the past, and a house that had no soul, no story. She stood up slowly, walking over to the window. The view outside was quiet, almost serene. The street was still, the trees lining the sidewalk swaying gently in the wind. It was a peaceful morning, but the peace felt hollow. She had hoped this place would bring her peace. She had hoped this place would be the answer to everything, a place to forget, a place to heal. But it was, not yet, and maybe it never would be. The house was a shell, and she was the only one who could fill it. But she didn't know how to do that. She didn't know where to begin. She could paint the walls, arrange the furniture, make the bed, but it wouldn't make this place hers. Not yet. Her eyes drifted back to the photograph on the floor, the faces of two children who had no idea what was coming, no idea how quickly life would change. It was like looking at a stranger, someone she didn't know anymore. The past felt like it belonged to someone else. It felt like a story she had read once, long ago, and had forgotten the ending to. She bent down and picked up the photograph, holding it in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. The photo was so simple, so ordinary. But now it was a relic, a memory she couldn't seem to let go of. It was the last thing she had from that life, from that time before everything changed. She could still see the happiness in their eyes, could still feel the warmth of those moments, but it was slipping away. And maybe that was the hardest part. The feeling that she was losing herself in this house, in this new life, and there was nothing left to hold on to. The photo felt heavy in her hands, a reminder of something she couldn't return to, something that no longer belonged to her. She didn't know if she could ever fill the space in this house with enough to make it feel like home. Her fingers brushed the edges of the photograph one last time before she placed it down on the counter, her heart heavy with the realization that maybe the house wasn't the problem. Maybe it was her. Maybe she wasn't ready to move on. Maybe she wasn't ready to let go of what had been. The quiet stretched out around her, the silence in the house thick, suffocating. She stood there for a moment, feeling lost. The walls seemed to close in, and for the first time, she wondered if this house would ever be more than just four walls, empty and waiting. Would it ever feel like home? The phone sat on the kitchen counter, its surface gleaming under the soft light, untouched and still. The silence in the room stretched longer than it should have, its weight pressing on Sarah's chest. She hadn't realized how much the constant buzzing, the ringing, the incessant messages had filled the space between them until it was gone. Now, in its absence, the stillness was deafening. She hadn't heard from Emily all day. Not a single call, not a text. Sarah tried to busy herself, arranging the dishes she had already placed in the cupboard, wiping down the countertops that had no crumbs to clean. But her eyes kept drifting back to the phone, as if waiting for it to ring, waiting for the sound that would break the silence and fill the house with the familiar hum of a life once lived. The minutes passed, slow and heavy. Each tick of the clock on the wall seemed to mock her, reminding her how little time had actually passed, how much had changed. She wondered if it was a sign of progress. A sign that Emily had finally taken the space Sarah had given her, that she was finally moving forward. But another part of her, the part she refused to acknowledge, couldn't help but wonder if the silence was something worse. Was it the beginning of the distance that had been creeping between them for so long? Had the decision to let Emily go only made the gap between them wider? She caught herself again, standing still in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the door. She hadn't realized how often she had looked at it, as if expecting a knock, a voice to call through it, a reason to open it again. She hadn't expected this. Not really. She thought she had prepared herself for this moment, thought she had made the right choice by letting Emily go, by offering her the space she needed. But now, with the phone sitting silently in front of her, Sarah wondered if it had been the right decision at all. The house felt emptier now, quieter. The kind of empty that sank into the bones, the kind of quiet that made everything feel heavier, sharper. She could still hear the echoes of Emily's footsteps in the hall, the sound of her laughter that had once bounced off the walls, the soft murmur of her voice calling from upstairs. But those sounds felt like ghosts now, memories that couldn't be touched. They belonged to a time that was slipping away from her, slipping away from both of them. Sarah looked at the phone again, willing it to ring, willing it to bring some kind of resolution, some kind of clarity. But the silence remained, thick and unbroken. It wasn't just the silence that bothered her. It was the uncertainty, the not knowing. She had always been able to predict Emily's actions, to understand her moods, her needs, her desires. But now there was this vast unknown between them, a distance that couldn't be crossed with words or calls. She didn't know what Emily was thinking, what Emily was feeling, and that feeling of not knowing, of being left in the dark, gnawed at her. Was it truly the right decision to let Emily go? She had told herself it was, told herself that it was the only way for both of them to heal, to find space to breathe. But now, without the familiar weight of Emily's presence in the house, Sarah wasn't so sure. Was this space, this silence, really what they both needed? Or was it the beginning of something worse? A chasm between them that would never be filled. The phone remained silent, its screen still dark, its surface as smooth and untouched as it had been when she first placed it there. Sarah's hand hovered over it, then pulled back. It felt like an impossible choice to pick it up, to reach out, to make the first move. But wasn't that what she had been doing all along? Trying to fix things, trying to fix them both. She wondered what Emily needed from this space now. What was she searching for? What was she running from? And what was Sarah running from too? The questions lingered in her mind, unanswered, unresolved. Every moment without a call from Emily felt like a moment lost, like time slipping away, like a door closing that Sarah could never open again. She could hear the wind picking up outside, the sound of it rushing through the trees, the soft rustle of leaves pressing against the windows. It was a small sound, insignificant, but in the stillness of the house, it felt like it was the only thing left moving. Celine had always been the one to reach out. She had always been the one to try, to bridge the gap, to fix what had been broken. But now, sitting in the silence, Sarah wondered if maybe she had been doing it wrong all along. Maybe Emily needed something different from her now. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she needed time to figure things out on her own, without Sarah's influence, without her constant presence. The thought sent a wave of sadness through her chest. If Emily was moving on, if she was really finding her way, where did that leave Sarah? The phone still sat there, the silence still filled the room. And then, almost reluctantly, Sarah stood up and walked toward the door, her fingers brushing against the cool, polished wood of the doorframe. The handle felt heavier than she remembered, as though it carried the weight of all the things unsaid. She hesitated for just a moment, then turned back to look at the phone one last time. The screen was still dark. There was no call, no message, nothing to bridge the space between them. But the door still waited. It was still there, just as it had always been, offering the possibility of something more, of something beyond the silence. Sarah exhaled softly, then opened the door, stepping into the world outside. The wind rushed past her, the world just beginning to change. The phone rang twice before Sarah picked it up. The sound of it felt foreign in the quiet of the house, as though it didn't belong there anymore. Her fingers hesitated for a moment, hovering over the screen, unsure of what to expect. The silence in the room stretched longer than it should have, the weight of the past few days pressing on her chest. "Hello," Emily's voice came through, softer than Sarah had remembered, like it had been smoothed down by distance. The words felt thin, almost fragile, like they were being spoken through a veil. Sarah cleared her throat. "Hi, Emily." There was a pause on the other end, a brief moment of stillness before Emily spoke again. "I wasn't sure if you'd answer." The words felt heavy, a layer of tension lying thick between them. Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, the phone pressed to her ear, the space around her too quiet, too empty. The house was still, but her thoughts were anything but. They swirled around her like dust in the corners of the room, impossible to sweep away. "I've been staying with a friend," Emily said after another pause. "Just staying with a friend. I don't know, Sarah. I'm just not ready to be in my own space yet." Her voice trailed off, as though the words had slipped away before she could finish them. Sarah's fingers brushed the edge of the countertop, the cool surface grounding her for a moment. She had expected a conversation like this, knew it was coming, but still, the words landed differently now. "How long?" she asked quietly, her throat tight. "Not long," Emily answered quickly, her tone almost defensive. "I just needed to be somewhere else, you know. I needed some space." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to collect her thoughts. She didn't know how to feel. The concern was there, as it always was. The worry about Emily, about what she was doing, how she was coping. But there was something else too, something tangled in the quiet between them, something she couldn't quite name. "Is it working?" Sarah asked softly, the question hanging in the air like a delicate thread. She didn't know if she was asking about the space or about something deeper. She didn't know if she even knew what she was asking. Emily was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could almost hear the weight of the silence on the other end. Then, "I guess it's helping," she said, her voice sounding smaller, quieter than it had been before. "I don't know, I'm just not sure what I'm supposed to do right now." Sarah's heart twisted. She wanted to say something, anything, to fix this, but the words didn't come. She sat there, the phone in her hand, feeling the space between them growing larger, the distance stretching out farther than she could reach. "I just thought you'd be settled by now," Sarah said, before she could stop herself. The words felt like they were slipping out without her permission, like they had been waiting to be said. I thought you'd be moving forward, getting back on track." The words hung in the air, heavier than she intended. There was a thread of guilt running through them, mixed with something else. Something Sarah wasn't ready to admit. Maybe she wasn't just worried. Maybe she was frustrated. Maybe she wanted more than just to hear Emily's voice on the other end of the line. "I don't know what you want me to say," Emily responded, her voice quieter now, like she was retreating further away. "I'm doing the best I can." The silence stretched again, this time filled with the weight of unfinished thoughts, of things neither of them was ready to say. The house felt too big again, the quiet pressing down on her like it had when Emily first left. Only now, Sarah realized, it wasn't just the house that felt too empty. It was her heart. The space inside her that she had thought was filled was still aching, still waiting. "What do you want, Sarah?" Emily's voice cut through the quiet, but the question wasn't sharp, wasn't accusing. It was softer than Sarah had expected, like it came from a place of uncertainty. "What do you really want from me now?" Sarah closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. She had asked herself the same thing over and over. What did she want from Emily? What did she want from this? From her? From them? The truth was, she wasn't sure. She didn't know if she wanted Emily back, not the way things had been before. She didn't know if she was ready for that, or if she even could be. But there was this gnawing feeling, this ache in her chest, a longing for something she couldn't name. Maybe it was a piece of the past, a piece of the relationship they used to have. Maybe it was the hope that they could get back to something, anything, that felt like it used to. But the distance between them felt so vast now, too vast to bridge with just words. "I don't know," Sarah finally said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know what I want, Emily. I just wanted you to be okay. I wanted you to be okay, and now I don't know what this is." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for a long time. There was a soft, almost painful sigh before Emily spoke again. "I don't know either," she whispered. "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to figure it out." It wasn't an answer. It wasn't the resolution Sarah had hoped for, the certainty she had wanted to hear. But it was something real. It was the truth in its own quiet way. Sarah sat in the quiet for a moment, her hand resting on the phone. There was so much left unsaid, so much that couldn't be fixed, couldn't be repaired with just one conversation. The space between them was still there, still wide, still uncertain. But somehow, just hearing Emily say it, hearing her admit that she didn't have all the answers, made Sarah feel less alone in the silence. "I'll be here when you're ready," Sarah said softly, the words coming out with a gentleness she hadn't expected. "Whenever you're ready." She didn't know if Emily would hear it. She didn't know if she would understand. But it was the only thing Sarah could offer now. A promise. A quiet, uncertain promise. The phone clicked softly as Emily said goodbye, her voice still distant but somehow lighter. Sarah sat there for a moment longer, the weight of the conversation lingering, but with it came a sense of relief. The silence wasn't as deafening now. It wasn't as heavy. The line between them still felt fragile, but it was there. A thread that neither of them could see, but both of them could feel. And for now, that would have to be enough. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft, golden beams across the living room floor. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes with the early hours of the day, before the world wakes up fully. The house felt peaceful for the first time in what felt like weeks. Sarah stood in the kitchen, the hum of the coffee maker filling the air, her fingers wrapped around a mug, its warmth seeping into her skin. She hadn't expected the day to start like this, not after the phone call with Emily the night before. The conversation had been more of the same, quiet, disconnected, the spaces between them thick with things left unsaid. But still, there had been a softening in Emily's voice. A small crack, just enough to make Sarah wonder if maybe, just maybe, they were closer to something real, something they could build on. The doorbell rang, sudden and sharp, breaking the calm of the morning. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be this early? She set the mug down on the counter and moved toward the door, her feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. When she opened it, there was nothing but silence. No visitor waiting outside, no footsteps, no voices. But at her feet, lying innocently on the doorstep, was a small folded piece of paper. Her breath caught in her chest. She bent down to pick it up, the note cold against her fingertips. The handwriting was familiar, though different somehow, the letters a little shaky, the ink smudged in places as though written in a hurry. It wasn't much, just a few lines. "I'm sorry, I couldn't stay. I don't know where to go next." The words hung in the air, simple, direct, but carrying more weight than Sarah could bear in that moment. She stood there for a long time, staring at the paper in her hands, her heart pounding louder than the quiet of the morning. She didn't know how long she stood there, but when she looked down, she realized her hand was trembling. A single tear had fallen onto the note, blurring the ink slightly. It was an accidental thing, a simple drop of emotion, but it made the words feel more real, more fragile. The silence that followed felt too thick, like she was breathing underwater. The small room, the quiet house, felt suffocating now. It was as if the note had opened a door she wasn't ready to walk through. Her fingers gripped the paper harder, the words staring up at her, unyielding. "I couldn't stay." The words repeated in her mind like a drum beat, relentless. Sarah's chest tightened. Had she really pushed Emily away? Had her decision to give her space, to let her go, been the right one? She had thought it was. She had thought it was the only way. But now, holding the note, her stomach churned with a sudden, deep panic. Had she made the wrong choice? Had she closed the door on her sister without realizing how fragile everything was between them? The coffee, forgotten, continued to drip in the background, the sound filling the silence but doing nothing to ease the sudden weight in Sarah's chest. She stepped back into the house, the door clicking softly behind her. The note felt heavy in her hands, like it carried the weight of everything they had been through, all the misunderstandings, the silences, the hurt that neither of them had truly confronted. She sat down slowly on the couch, the paper still clutched tightly in her hand, and stared out the window, the morning light suddenly too bright, too harsh. She had wanted this. She had told herself that this was the only way to let Emily go, to let her find her own way, to give her the space she needed. But what if she was wrong? What if in giving Emily that space, she had pushed her too far away? The idea gnawed at her, the fear settling into her bones. Emily had never been good at expressing herself, had never been good at asking for help. Had she been trying to reach out this whole time, and Sarah just hadn't been able to see it? The note didn't answer that question. It didn't explain where Emily was, or what she needed, or if she'd be okay. It didn't even ask for forgiveness, not really. It was just a statement, a simple confession of what had already happened. I couldn't stay. Sarah pressed her hand to her face, feeling the weight of the tear that had fallen earlier, still fresh on her cheek. How could she have let this happen? How could she have let Emily slip through her fingers like this? A part of her wanted to pick up the phone, to call, to try to fix everything with just a few words, but another part of her knew that wouldn't change anything. The silence between them had grown too wide, too deep. The note was the first step, the first hint of the distance that had already begun to form. She looked down at the paper again, the words still haunting her, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. She had thought letting Emily go was what was best. But now, holding the note, she wasn't sure. Maybe she had to face the truth, the hard truth, that letting Emily go wasn't the answer. That the distance they had created was only pushing them further apart. But how do you go back? How do you close the distance when the space between you feels too wide to cross? She stood up, the note still in her hand, and walked toward the window. The world outside was quiet, the street still, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something. Something small, something important that she had overlooked in her attempt to let go. She glanced back at the front door, where the note had been left. The weight of it, the weight of her choices, pressed down on her again, and she felt a flood of emotion that she hadn't been prepared for. Did she make the wrong choice? The question kept repeating itself, growing louder and louder in her mind, until it was the only thing she could hear. There were no easy answers, no way to undo what had been done. But one thing was clear, The silence, the distance, it wasn't the solution. Not anymore. She didn't know what to do next, but she knew one thing. She couldn't keep waiting for the answers to come to her. Not anymore. The doorbell rang just past midnight, its shrill sound slicing through the silence of the house like an unwelcome guest. Sarah froze, the sound pulling her from the quiet comfort of the evening, her heart immediately picking up its pace. She had barely started to settle into the stillness of the night when the ring echoed down the hallway, unsettling the calm. It wasn't a sound she'd been expecting. Her first thought was Emily. Her sister was unpredictable, sure, but this was different. Emily hadn't called, hadn't left any word that she would be coming back, and yet the night felt too thick, too empty without her. But it was Emily, not this time. Sarah hesitated before moving toward the door, a knot tightening in her stomach. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had come to the house in the dead of night. The world outside was quiet, as it always was in the early hours, and the moonlight barely made it through the blinds. She reached for the doorknob, fingers cold against the metal, and opened the door. Standing on the other side was a man she didn't recognize. He looked tired, his face drawn and worn, his eyes searching, like he wasn't quite sure of himself. His clothes were plain, an old jacket that had seen better days, and he stood there with an odd sort of hesitation, as though he wasn't quite sure why he was standing there either. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's breath was shallow, her eyes darting over his face, trying to read him, to make sense of why he was here. "I'm sorry to disturb you," the man finally spoke, his voice rough, as if he hadn't used it much lately. He looked past her, then back at her, as though the words were taking their time to find their place. I'm looking for Emily." The mention of Emily sent a ripple of unease through Sarah. Emily had been gone for days, and Sarah hadn't heard anything, hadn't expected anyone to come looking for her. This man was a stranger, someone who didn't belong in the quiet world she had been trying to rebuild. She instinctively stepped back, a silent barrier forming between them. "She's not here," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with the hint of something else, something she wasn't quite prepared to face. The man seemed to consider this for a moment, his face unreadable. He shifted on his feet, his hands jammed deep into his jacket pockets, as if he were still trying to make up his mind about something. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure why I'm here, but I promised her. She made me promise, and he trailed off, shaking his head, as if the weight of his words didn't quite match up with the confusion in his eyes. Sarah took a slow breath, her mind racing. A promise. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice firmer now, though her heart still drummed unsteadily in her chest. The man blinked, startled by the directness of her question. He seemed to hesitate again before answering, the uncertainty in his eyes deepening. "I'm Jack," he said, his voice quieter now. I was with Emily a while back. We had something, I suppose." Something about the way he said it, the way his eyes flickered with hesitation, made Sarah's chest tighten. Had something? What did that mean? Emily hadn't said anything about anyone named Jack. Sarah had assumed Emily had cut ties with everyone, that her past had been buried somewhere far behind her. And now here was this man, standing in her doorway, a part of her sister's past that she didn't even know existed. "I'm not sure why she'd want me to come here," Jack continued, the words coming out haltingly, as though he wasn't sure how to explain himself. "But I'm supposed to give you this." He pulled a small, folded envelope from his coat pocket, the paper thin and worn. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Emily's handwriting. The sight of it stopped Sarah's breath for a moment. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope, the paper feeling foreign in her hands. She glanced up at Jack, but he had already turned his gaze away, staring down at his shoes as though the act of standing in front of her was something he couldn't quite reconcile. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her voice quieter now. Jack shrugged, a helpless gesture. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely a murmur. "She gave it to me the last time I saw her. She said you needed it, but—" His words trailed off again, leaving the air thick with unspoken things. Sarah opened the envelope slowly, almost afraid to see what was inside, as if opening it might unlock something she wasn't ready for. Inside, there was just one piece of paper, the writing unmistakably Emily's, looping and hurried. "I'm sorry for everything, for what I never said, for what I've been running from. I'm leaving now. There's nothing left for me here, but I need you to understand I'm doing this for me. It's time I stopped hiding. You don't need to follow me. You don't need to look for me. But please know that I'm not abandoning you. I'm just trying to find a way to breathe again. I'll be okay. Please don't look for me, don't call me, just let me go, please." Sarah read the words 3 times, each time feeling the weight of them sink deeper into her chest. Let me go. The finality of it hit her harder than she had anticipated, a surge of emotions overwhelming her as the house suddenly felt colder, quieter. The words weren't just an apology, they were a farewell. A real one. She looked up at Jack, the paper still clutched tightly in her hands. "Where did she go?" she asked, her voice almost breaking. Jack shook his head, his gaze darting away from hers. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "She just asked me to make sure you got this," and he looked up at her, meeting her eyes for the first time since he had arrived. "I think she's gone for good. She didn't say where, didn't tell me anything. She just wanted me to deliver this. To you, that's all." The air between them felt thick now, suffocating. Sarah's chest tightened, a flood of questions rising inside her, but she couldn't find the words. Why hadn't Emily come to her? Why had she chosen to leave like this, leaving nothing but a stranger at her door? The man standing in front of her wasn't someone she had ever expected to meet. He was a part of Emily's life, but he was a stranger to her. A messenger, maybe, but even that felt like something they couldn't quite understand. She looked down at the note again, the words swimming in her vision. "Please don't look for me." The pain of those words hit her harder than anything Emily had ever said before. She had been too late, too distant, too wrapped up in her own world to understand what Emily needed. And now, with the weight of the note in her hands, Sarah understood she had missed her chance. With a deep breath, she folded the note and tucked it into her pocket, her hands trembling. Jack shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Sarah and the empty space around them. "I'll go," he said quietly, taking a step back. "I just wanted to make sure you got this. I know she wanted you to have it. She always cared about you." The words hung in the air as he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing at the door, her heart heavy with questions and regrets. She didn't know what this meant, what she was supposed to do with all of it. All she knew was that Emily was gone, truly gone this time, and she was left holding the weight of a promise, a stranger, and a goodbye. And there, in the doorway, Sarah felt the silence settle back in, even deeper than before. The house was quieter than usual, as it often was in the late afternoon. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a soft, amber glow through the living room windows. It was the kind of light that made everything seem still, as though time was slowing down just for a moment. But for Sarah, the stillness of the house only amplified the growing unease inside her. She had spent the last few hours sifting through boxes, organizing the remnants of a life that felt increasingly distant, increasingly fragmented. The past few days had been filled with questions and half-answers, with Emily's note weighing heavy in her pocket. What did it mean? Where had Emily gone? Why had she left without a word, without even a goodbye? And now, as she opened drawer after drawer, searching for something to anchor her, she wasn't sure what she was looking for anymore. It was an old drawer, one that had once been full of odds and ends, things she hadn't used in years. She hadn't thought much about it since they moved in. But today, as she reached into the back of the drawer to pull out an old receipt, her fingers brushed against something thicker. Something folded, hidden behind the clutter. She paused, her breath catching in her chest. The paper was worn, edges curled from age, its yellowed surface rough to the touch. She could barely make out the writing, but she didn't need to look closely to know whose handwriting it was. It was Emily's. Sarah's hand trembled as she pulled it out, the weight of it somehow heavier than she expected. The letter was crumpled, as if it had been hastily shoved away, forgotten. She didn't know why she hesitated to open it. Maybe it was the fear of what she might find. Maybe it was the possibility that this letter, this piece of Emily, held something she wasn't ready to hear. But she opened it anyway, her heart pounding in her ears, the room suddenly too quiet. The words were hurried, imperfect. "Sarah, I don't know how to say this, but I feel like I'm losing myself. Things have changed, and I don't know who I am anymore. I've always promised you that I'd be there, that I'd stay with you, no matter what happened. But the truth is, I'm scared. Scared that if I stay, I'll drag you down with me. That the weight of everything I've been carrying will break you too. I've been trying to hold it together, trying to be strong for you, but I don't know if I can keep pretending. I don't know if I can keep being the person you think I am. I've always told you I'd stay, that we'd face the world together. But what if staying means I'll only pull you deeper into the darkness? What if leaving is the only way to protect you? I'm sorry, I know I promised, but I'm breaking my promise. Please understand. Please forgive me. I'm not strong enough to be the person you need. The words blurred as Sarah's vision swam with tears she hadn't known she was holding back. She read them again, the ink smudging slightly, as if Emily had written them in a hurry, too overwhelmed by something she couldn't put into words. Sarah's fingers tightened around the paper, the weight of it sinking into her chest. Emily had never shown this to her. Why hadn't she? Why had she kept it hidden away, tucked deep in a drawer, only to be discovered now, when it was too late to ask her why? I'm breaking my promise. The words echoed in Sarah's mind, and the room seemed to close in on her. The letter felt like a confession, an apology, a secret Emily had carried alone. The fear that had always lingered in her voice, the uncertainty in her eyes whenever they spoke, it was all here, all wrapped up in these lines. Emily had never been able to speak of her own pain, of her own struggles. She had kept it all hidden, locked away in pieces of paper, in quiet corners of the house, in the spaces between them. But why had Emily shared this with her? Why had she felt like she couldn't come to Sarah to say what was really on her mind? The letter, now sitting heavy in Sarah's hands, was a testament to everything Emily had tried to protect her from. But it was also a sign of everything Sarah had failed to see, failed to understand. And now, with the letter in her hands, Sarah realized the truth she had been avoiding. Emily hadn't just left because of Sarah's decisions. She hadn't left because Sarah had pushed her away. No, Emily had left because she had been carrying a burden, a weight that Sarah had never truly seen. It wasn't about what Sarah had done. It was about the way Emily had carried her pain, silently, on her own. The house felt colder now, the silence heavier, more oppressive. Sarah sat down slowly on the couch, her hands still clutching the letter, her eyes staring blankly at the floor. How had she missed this? How had she not seen what Emily was going through? The signs had been there, hadn't they? Emily's quiet moments, her distant looks, the way she'd pull away when Sarah tried to reach out. But Sarah had never asked. She had never pushed hard enough, never dug deep enough to find out what Emily was hiding. She had been too focused on the space between them, too focused on her own fears, to see what was really going on. Sarah folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, as if the paper itself carried all of Emily's unspoken words. She placed it back in the drawer, the place where it had been hidden for so long, and sat in the stillness for a while longer, the weight of the truth settling in her chest. What had Emily known that Sarah hadn't? Had she known all along that she was never going to be able to stay? Had she known that in order to protect Sarah, she would have to leave? The room felt emptier now, the house colder. The promise that had been left behind seemed impossible to carry, impossible to keep. And yet, the letter had made one thing clear: the weight of it all, the burden of secrets and unspoken fears, had been too much for Emily to bear alone. Sarah's fingers grazed the edges of the drawer, the soft wood smooth under her touch. She couldn't undo the past. She couldn't take back the moments she had missed, the words she had failed to say. But maybe, just maybe, understanding Emily's pain, understanding what she had been carrying, was the first step toward forgiving her, toward forgiving herself. The letter was a bridge, a small one, fragile and broken, but it was a bridge nonetheless. And as Sarah sat there, her hands trembling slightly, she wondered if there was a way to rebuild what had been lost. But for now, all she could do was sit with the truth, let it settle, let it stay. And maybe, in time, the silence wouldn't feel quite so heavy. The living room was quieter than it had ever been, the kind of quiet that fills up a space so completely that it presses against you, makes your thoughts too loud, too close. Sarah stood in the middle of the room, the floor cool beneath her feet, the weight of the emptiness surrounding her. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the air had a stillness to it that felt almost suffocating. She didn't know how long she had been standing there. Time had blurred into something unrecognizable. There was no ticking of the clock, no hum of distant noise, just the soft sound of her breath, each inhale and exhale a reminder of how alone she felt. The house, the one she had fought so hard to make into something new, now felt like nothing more than an empty shell. She had filled it with furniture, with things she had thought would bring comfort. But now, standing in the middle of it, she could feel that nothing could fill the emptiness. Not really. The quiet settled over her like a blanket she couldn't shake off. It wasn't just the house that felt empty now. It was her too. She wasn't sure when it had started, when she had started to feel like this, like the life she had built here was something that didn't quite fit her. The decisions she had made, the things she had sacrificed for what she thought she wanted, now felt like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite put together. She glanced around the room, her eyes settling on the few items she had brought with her from the old place. The couch was too big for the space, the coffee table too small. Nothing felt right, nothing felt like it belonged. And that wasn't just about the house, it was everything. Her sister, Emily, had left without warning. Left with the weight of things unsaid, things Sarah didn't even know she had missed until it was too late. The note from Emily still sat in the drawer, unopened again, a reminder of everything Sarah had failed to see, to understand. The life Sarah had imagined when she moved in here, the one she had hoped would be filled with new beginnings, with peace and quiet, felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Her past, the one she had tried to leave behind, crept in now, its whispers so loud that she could no longer ignore them. The decisions, the sacrifices, the things she thought she had wanted, they all felt like shadows now, following her, haunting her every step. She closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of it all settling deep in her chest. Had she really made the right choice? Had pushing Emily away been the right thing to do? She had told herself it was, that she needed space, that Emily needed space. But now, with everything quiet, with nothing but the sound of her own thoughts, Sarah wasn't so sure. The stillness in the room was deafening now. The choices she had made, the decision to push Emily away, to take on this new life, to try to build something from the broken pieces of what they had, were starting to feel like mistakes. Her life before this, before the house, before the silence, had been messy, yes. It had been full of noise, full of uncertainty, full of her sister's laughter and their late-night talks, full of the chaos that had once felt like home. She had walked away from it, thinking she was doing the right thing, thinking that if she could just move forward, if she could just get away from the past, everything would be different. But now, in the quiet of the living room, she wasn't so sure. The weight of the past was heavy. It pressed against her chest, suffocating her. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Not the way she had tried to, not the way she had convinced herself that moving on would make everything better. She had left things behind, but she hadn't truly let them go. The guilt, the regrets, the things she hadn't said, they were all still here. She had been so sure of herself when she made the decision to leave, to move into the house and start over. She had thought she could escape. But now, it felt like the past had caught up with her in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the house that was missing pieces. It was her too. She had thought she was running toward something better, but all she had done was run away from what she had needed to face. The silence felt overwhelming now, too much for her to bear. The weight of it crushed her, made the room feel smaller, tighter. She had wanted peace, but now she realized that peace wasn't something you could find by leaving. Peace wasn't something that could be bought with a new house, a new start. She didn't know what to do with the silence anymore. She didn't know what to do with the feeling of being untethered, of having no one and nothing to hold on to. A deep breath escaped her as she stepped back, the air suddenly feeling too thick, too heavy. She moved toward the window, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled the blinds open. Outside, the world was still. The trees swayed gently in the wind, the streetlights flickering softly in the distance. It was a peaceful night, but it felt distant, almost unreal. Everything felt distant now. The house, her life, the choices she had made, they were all disconnected, floating just out of reach. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. The peace she had been searching for wasn't something she could find in a new house or a new life. It wasn't something that could be fixed by rearranging furniture or burying the past. Peace came when you stopped running. Peace came when you let yourself face the things that hurt, the things you didn't want to deal with. And maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been ready to face them. Her gaze lingered on the quiet street outside, the darkness swallowing everything in sight. She wasn't sure if she would ever find the peace she was looking for. But standing there, in the quiet, in the weight of it all, she knew one thing: she couldn't keep running forever. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop and face what had been waiting for her all along. The doorbell rang again, this time louder than before, echoing through the quiet house. Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. The house had been still, empty for days. She had grown accustomed to the silence, to the space left behind. And now this. The sound of a knock at the door, the echo of a past she wasn't ready to face. Her hand hovered over the door handle. She had thought the silence was the hardest part. She had told herself that Emily's absence would create room for something new, something different. But now, with the doorbell ringing, it felt like the quiet had been a lie. When she opened the door, there was Emily, standing there in the doorway, her suitcase at her feet. Her face was tired, eyes shadowed with something Sarah couldn't quite place. She looked like she had been somewhere far away, not physically, but emotionally. And in that moment, Sarah could tell that this was not the reunion she had imagined. Emily's gaze met hers, but there was no warmth in it. No apologies, no words of reconciliation, just silence. I didn't know where else to go, Emily finally spoke, her voice quiet, unsure, like she wasn't sure if the words would come out the right way. I don't want to come back, not like this, but I don't want to leave either. Sarah's heart tightened at the admission. It was the kind of answer she had been afraid of. She had imagined Emily walking back through the door with clarity, with some kind of explanation, with the certainty of a decision made. But this was different. This was unspoken, unclear. Emily was caught in the same cycle, the same indecision, and Sarah felt it too. The silence between them thickened. The air seemed heavy with everything they hadn't said, with all the words that had been left unsaid. It pressed against Sarah's chest, made it harder to breathe. She glanced around the doorway, back into the house, and then back at Emily. "You don't have to stay if you're not ready," Sarah said, her voice softer than she meant it to be. She didn't want to push, didn't want to force a decision out of her sister that neither of them was prepared to make. "But if you're staying, you need to be sure." Emily stepped inside without answering, her eyes scanning the room briefly before falling on Sarah again. There was something unsettled about the way she moved, something hesitant in the way she entered, as if she were afraid to make herself too comfortable in a place that had once been hers. The house felt different now, too. The walls, once a sanctuary, now seemed like a prison. A space that had been meant to hold both of them, to give them room to heal, now felt suffocating. It was a room filled with unanswered questions, with too much history. And no matter how many times Sarah rearranged the furniture, the house felt empty, as though it couldn't truly belong to either of them. "I'm sorry," Emily muttered, almost to herself, as she set her suitcase down by the door. "I didn't mean for it to be like this." Sarah watched her chest tight. "It's not just you, Em," she said quietly. "I don't know how to fix this either. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this space now." She gestured vaguely at the house, at everything she had tried to fill with things, with routines, but the emptiness lingered. It was still there. It wouldn't leave. "I thought we both needed space, but I didn't realize how big it would feel without you here." Emily's shoulders slumped, and she dropped her gaze, as if the weight of the room had become too much to bear. Sarah stepped closer to her, her hand hovering uncertainly at her side, unsure of what to say, what to do. All this time, all this silence, and now that Emily was back, there were no easy words left. "Do you want to talk about it?" Sarah asked, but she already knew the answer. Emily wasn't ready. They weren't ready. "I don't know what to say," Emily whispered, her voice breaking slightly. She seemed small suddenly, like a child caught in a space too big for her. "I just don't want to keep running. I thought if I left, I'd be able to find a way to breathe, but I'm not breathing. I'm just stuck." The words hung there in the air between them. They had both been stuck in their own way, hadn't they? Sarah had tried to run from the pain, from the guilt, from everything she couldn't control. And Emily had tried to run too, run from the weight of it all, run from the promises that had kept her bound to Sarah, even when she had wanted to break free. Sarah didn't know what the right answer was anymore. She didn't know how to make Emily feel like she was home when both of them had been running in different directions. But she knew this much: they couldn't keep running from each other forever. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence it had been before. It wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with everything they had carried together, everything they had tried to escape. Emily let out a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling as though the air around them had suddenly become too thick to breathe. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she said, her voice quieter now, a note of defeat creeping in. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say to make this right." "You don't have to fix it," Sarah said softly. "We just have to figure it out together, one step at a time." It wasn't the solution she had hoped for. It wasn't the resolution she had expected, but maybe that was the point. There was no quick fix, no easy way to undo what had been done. But perhaps, for the first time, Sarah could see that they didn't need to fix everything all at once. Maybe all they needed to do was stop running, stop pretending they had it all figured out, and just be in the same space for a while. Maybe that would be enough to start again. Emily looked at her then, a slight, uncertain smile forming at the edges of her lips, the first real gesture of connection between them in what felt like a long time. Maybe it's enough to just be here. And for the first time in days, Sarah felt a small shift, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Not all at once, not perfectly, but together, whatever that would look like. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared. It never would. But in the quiet that stretched between them, Sarah realized that maybe, just maybe, they could learn to carry it together. And that, for now, was enough. The evening came softly, like a sigh, the last traces of sunlight fading from the sky, leaving the world in a soft gray glow. Sarah sat by the window, watching as the colors in the sky deepened into dusk, the shadows stretching across the empty rooms of the house. The quiet, which had once felt so oppressive, now seemed to wrap around her like a familiar cloak. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside filtered in, a gentle reminder that the world was still turning, still moving forward, even if she wasn't sure how to. The house had settled into itself over the past few days, the stillness of it no longer something to fear, but something to understand. It was hers now, in every sense. The memories that clung to the walls, the spaces that felt too empty, too heavy, were finally starting to feel like part of her story. Not the story she had expected, not the one she had dreamed of, but the one she had to live. The phone had stayed silent, just like the rest of the house. Emily hadn't called. Emily hadn't come back, and somehow that was okay. The note from Emily, the apology, the goodbye, it had all settled into the background of Sarah's mind. She had thought it would hurt more than it did. She had expected to feel the ache of her sister's absence in every corner of the house, but now, as the days had passed, it had softened. There was still a gap between them, still a piece of herself that she had given away. But for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of that gap. She felt lighter somehow. The past had been a constant, a tether that had kept her tied to things she couldn't change, to decisions she couldn't undo. But now, standing in the middle of the living room, she realized that it was no longer controlling her. It wasn't gone, it would never truly be gone, but it didn't hold the same power over her. She had spent so long thinking she needed closure, that she needed answers, that she needed some finality to make things okay. But tonight, as the sky darkened and the house grew still around her, she understood something different. She didn't need closure, she didn't need answers. She needed acceptance. The kind of acceptance that didn't require explanation or justification. The kind of acceptance that simply allowed things to be without needing to fix them or change them. And in that moment, as the last light faded from the sky, Sarah realized that she had been carrying a responsibility she didn't need to. She had been holding on to the idea that she was responsible for everything, for Emily, for the past, for making things right. But now, she could let it go. For the first time, she felt a wave of release wash over her. She stood up, the floor cool beneath her feet, and walked to the door. The quiet of the house surrounded her like a blanket, a soft, familiar thing. She opened the door and stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her face like a gentle caress. The night was still, the stars just beginning to pierce through the dark sky, distant and cold but beautiful in their own way. The world outside felt different. She felt different. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't carrying the weight of responsibility. She wasn't carrying the weight of anyone else's choices but her own. Emily's departure, the end of that chapter, had been the final release, and with it, Sarah could breathe. The house, now hers in every sense, stood behind her, quiet and still. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the home she had imagined, but it was hers and it was enough. The weight of the past, the guilt, the pain, it was still there, lingering, but it wasn't something she had to live under anymore. Sarah took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. She looked back at the house, the windows dark and empty, but in a way, it felt full. Full of possibility, full of potential, not for what she had lost, but for what she could build now on her own. And for the first time, she felt the stirrings of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: freedom. She stood there for a while, letting the air wrap around her, letting the weight of everything she had been carrying fall away. She didn't know what the future held or what the next step would be. But for the first time, she didn't feel the need to control it. She didn't need to have all the answers. For the first time, she was simply Sarah. standing in her own space, in her own life, with nothing but the present and the future ahead of her. And that was enough. The past would always linger, a shadow in the background, but Sarah was ready now to step forward, to live her life without the weight of what had been. To live in the present, to live for herself, without the burden of promises she hadn't made, without the need for anyone else to hold her up. She closed the door behind her, the quiet of the house settling once again, and stepped into the night. It was her time now, and for the first time in years, she felt free.